I'm 85 years old now, and if there is one thing I wish I had understood much earlier in life, it is this. Happiness in old age does not come from big achievements. It does not come from money, status, or the applause of other people. True happiness comes quietly. It hides in ordinary moments most people rush past without noticing. When I was younger, I believed happiness was always somewhere ahead of me. I thought it lived in the next promotion, the next house, the next relationship, the next goal. I kept running toward the future, convinced that one day I would finally arrive at a place called happiness. But life has a strange way of teaching us lessons slowly. At 85, I now sit beside my window every morning with a warm cup of coffee in my hands, and sometimes I simply watch the sunlight touch the trees outside. The birds move from branch to branch without worrying about tomorrow. The wind brushes against the curtains softly, almost like a whisper from heaven itself. And in those quiet moments, I feel something I searched for my entire life. Peace, not excitement, not achievement, just peace. And peace, my friend, is one of the deepest forms of happiness a human being can ever know. I remember a time many years ago when I was too busy to notice life. My children were growing up, bills were piling higher every month, and my mind was constantly racing. Even during family dinners, I was not truly present. My body sat at the table, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. I thought being productive was the same as living. I was wrong. One evening, after a very long day, I came home exhausted. My little daughter, who was only about 7 years old at the time, came running toward me holding a crayon drawing she had made. She smiled so proudly and said, "Daddy, look what I made for you." But I barely looked at it. I muttered something like, "That's nice, sweetheart," while walking past her toward the kitchen. I still remember the way her smile faded. That moment stayed with me for decades. You see, happiness is often standing right in front of us, holding a drawing in tiny hands, and we miss it because our minds are trapped somewhere else. Now that I'm older, I understand something painful but important. Many of the moments we call small are actually the biggest moments of our lives. A phone call from someone who loves you, a quiet walk at sunset, a grandchild laughing in another room, the smell of fresh bread, rain tapping gently against the window, someone remembering your birthday. A simple, "How are you today?" These moments seem ordinary when they happen, but later they become treasures in our memory. One of the saddest things about aging is realizing how many beautiful moments slipped through your fingers because you were too distracted to hold them. That is why the first habit that leads to happiness in old age is learning to slow down and appreciate the small moments again. Older people who remain joyful are not necessarily the richest or healthiest people. Often, they are simply the people who learned how to notice life. They notice the warmth of sunlight. They notice kindness. They notice beauty. They notice love. And because they notice these things, they still feel alive. I once met an elderly woman at a small park near my home. She had to be at least 90 years old. Every morning, she sat on the same bench feeding birds. One day I asked her, "Don't you get bored doing the same thing every day?" She smiled at me gently and said something I will never forget. "My dear, the birds are never the same twice." At first, I laughed softly, but later her words settled deep into my heart. The world changes every single day. The sky is never exactly the same color twice. The wind never blows in the same way twice. A person's laugh sounds different depending on whether they are happy, tired, or heartbroken. Life is constantly offering us beauty, but only people who slow down can truly see it. Many older people become unhappy because they spend too much time focusing on what they lost instead of what they still have. They think about youth, strength, opportunities, and people who are gone. And yes, loss is painful. Aging carries grief with it. There is no denying that. But happiness in old age begins when gratitude becomes stronger than regret. At 85, I cannot run like I once did. My hands ache sometimes. My memory is slower. Some mornings, my body feels heavy before the day even begins. But I am still here. I can still hear music. I can still taste homemade soup. I can still hug someone I love. I can still pray. I can still watch the sunrise. And that means life is still giving me gifts. There is a powerful secret that happy older people understand. Joy does not disappear with age. It simply changes shape. When you are young, happiness often comes loudly. It comes through adventure, excitement, romance, ambition, and dreams. But when you grow older, happiness becomes quieter. It comes through calm mornings, meaningful conversations, silence without loneliness, memories shared at the dinner table, feeling needed, feeling loved, feeling thankful. And honestly, this quieter happiness is deeper than the loud kind. One afternoon not long ago, my grandson came to visit me. He sat beside me on the porch while eating a sandwich. We barely spoke for nearly 20 minutes. We simply watched cars pass by and listened to distant dogs barking somewhere down the street. Before leaving, he hugged me and said, "I like being here with you." That simple sentence carried more happiness than many of the achievements I once chased for years. As people grow older, they often fear becoming invisible. Society celebrates youth so loudly that many elderly people begin to feel forgotten. But happiness does not come from being admired by the world. It comes from remaining connected to the heart. And the heart stays alive through appreciation. Appreciation keeps the soul warm. When you wake up tomorrow morning, try something simple. Before checking your worries, pause for a moment. Listen carefully. Notice the light entering your room. Notice your breathing. Notice the miracle that you are still alive. There are millions of people who would give anything for one more ordinary morning. Do not rush past yours. One of the greatest tragedies of human life is that we often realize what mattered only after it is gone. We miss our parents after their chair becomes empty. We miss our spouse after their side of the bed stays cold. We miss our health after pain arrives. But wisdom means learning to appreciate things before life takes them away. At 85, I have learned that happiness is not hidden in some distant future. It is here, now, in this very moment. It is sitting quietly beside us every day, waiting patiently for us to notice it. And perhaps that is why some elderly people remain so full of warmth and peace, even after everything life has put them through. They have finally stopped chasing life long enough to truly live it. The happiest older people are not always those with perfect lives. They are the ones who learned how to treasure imperfect moments. And that habit alone can completely change the final years of a person's life. I'm 85 years old now, and if you sit with me long enough, I will tell you something most elderly people quietly learn, but rarely say out loud. Bitterness is one of the heaviest things a person can carry into old age. It can destroy happiness slowly, silently, and completely. The sad truth is that almost everyone reaches old age carrying some kind of pain. By the time you are 80 or 90, life has already broken your heart more than once. Some people lose the love of their life. Some lose children. Some lose friendships they thought would last forever. Others are betrayed by family members they trusted deeply, and perhaps the hardest part is this: many wounds never fully heal. I know this because I have my own scars too. When I was younger, I believed that time automatically healed emotional pain, but age taught me something different. Time alone does not heal bitterness. Sometimes, time only gives bitterness a deeper place to hide. There was a man I once knew named Walter. He lived 2 houses down from me many years ago. From the outside, he seemed like a normal older man. He watered his lawn every morning. He waved politely at neighbors. He attended church every Sunday. But inside, he carried decades of anger. His brother had cheated him out of money when they were younger. Walter never forgave him. For 40 years, he replayed that betrayal over and over in his mind like an old movie he could not stop watching. Even after his brother died, Walter still talked about it with rage in his voice. One evening, while we sat together outside during sunset, He suddenly looked at me and said something heartbreaking. I wasted my whole life staying angry. I still remember the silence that followed those words. At that moment, I realized something powerful. Bitterness punishes the person carrying it far more than the person who caused the pain. Many people believe holding on to anger gives them strength, but in reality, it slowly steals their joy, their sleep, their peace, and sometimes even their health. And sadly, this becomes more dangerous in old age because older people spend more time alone with their thoughts. When the house becomes quiet, when the children move away, when retirement removes daily distractions, old memories begin to speak louder. If those memories are filled with resentment, they can poison the remaining years of a person's life. That is why the second habit that leads to happiness in old age is learning how to let go. Not because the pain was small, not because the betrayal did not matter, but because your peace matters more. Now listen carefully, because this is important. Forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. Some people misunderstand forgiveness completely. Forgiveness does not erase what someone did. It does not excuse cruelty. It does not mean you allow toxic people back into your life. Forgiveness simply means you stop allowing the pain to control your heart forever. At 85, I have realized that peace is far too valuable to hand over to old wounds. I once carried bitterness myself for many years toward someone I deeply loved. We had been close friends since youth, but one terrible misunderstanding slowly destroyed our relationship. Pride kept both of us silent. Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Holidays passed. Families grew older still. Neither of us reached out. Then one winter morning, I received a phone call telling me he had died unexpectedly during the night. And suddenly, all those years of anger felt meaningless. I cannot explain the regret I felt sitting alone in my kitchen that day. I kept thinking about all the conversations we never had, all the laughter we never shared again, all because two stubborn men waited too long. Old age teaches you that time is not unlimited, and once people are gone, no apology can reach them anymore. That is why happy older people learn something essential. Protecting your peace is more important than winning emotional battles. Some people spend decades trying to prove they were right, trying to make others feel guilty, trying to hold on to old pain as proof they were wronged. But eventually, you realize something humbling. Life is shorter than your anger. One of the most peaceful, elderly women I ever met lost her husband after 53 years of marriage. You would expect someone carrying that kind of grief to become bitter toward life itself. But she remained incredibly warm and kind. One day, I asked her how she managed to stay so gentle after such heartbreak. She smiled softly and said, "Because bitterness would not bring him back, but love still keeps him close." What wisdom! Some people grow older and become harder. Others grow older and become softer. The difference often comes down to whether they allowed pain to close their hearts or deepen them. You see, suffering can do two things to a human being. It can make you cruel, or it can make you compassionate. The happiest elderly people are usually those who turn their pain into understanding instead of resentment. They become patient with others because they know suffering personally. They become kinder because life humbled them. They become slower to judge because they know everyone is fighting hidden battles. And strangely enough, this softness creates happiness. Not shallow happiness, not loud happiness, but a deep emotional peace that settles into the soul. I know many older people who spend their final years replaying painful memories every day. They sit alone, feeding anger like a fire that never stops burning. They revisit betrayals so often that the wounds never close. But I also know elderly people who chose differently. People who decided, "I have suffered enough. I will not spend the rest of my life trapped inside old pain." Those people laugh more easily, sleep more peacefully, love more openly, and their presence feels lighter to everyone around them. One thing nobody tells you about old age is this: eventually, your emotional energy becomes precious. You simply do not have endless strength for drama, conflict, and emotional wars anymore. At 85, peace feels more valuable than pride. If someone misunderstands me now, I no longer feel the need to argue endlessly. If someone dislikes me, I let it go. If life disappoints me, I grieve it and continue forward. Because happiness in old age depends heavily on emotional freedom. And emotional freedom begins when bitterness loosens its grip on your heart. Sometimes forgiveness happens slowly, very slowly. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes you forgive a little at a time. And that is okay. Healing is not a race. But every small step away from resentment creates more room for peace inside you. I remember sitting alone one rainy evening after losing someone I loved deeply. I was overwhelmed with sadness and anger at life itself. Outside my window, rainwater slid slowly down the glass while thunder echoed in the distance. And suddenly, a strange thought entered my mind. I realized the storm outside would eventually pass no matter how powerful it felt in that moment. And so would the storm inside me. That realization changed something in me forever. Pain feels permanent when you are inside it. But emotions move like weather. Nothing stays forever. Not joy, not grief, not anger, not sorrow. Everything changes. That is why wise elderly people learn not to build permanent homes inside temporary pain. Instead, they keep moving gently forward. And perhaps this is one of the greatest secrets to happiness after 80. Learning how to carry memories without allowing them to poison your remaining years. At my age, I no longer want a heart filled with resentment. I want a heart light enough to enjoy simple things again. A warm conversation, a peaceful evening, a quiet prayer, a family gathering, a beautiful sunrise. Bitterness steals those moments. Forgiveness protects them. So if you are carrying old pain today, I hope you understand something important. You deserve peace too. Not someday. Not after everything is perfect. Now. Because the years pass faster than you think. And happiness in old age does not belong to those who lived perfect lives. It belongs to those who finally learned how to let go of what was hurting them. And after all these years, I have come to believe something with my whole heart: loneliness is one of the greatest pains of old age. Not physical pain. Not financial struggle. Not even illness. Loneliness. A person can survive many hardships in life if they still feel loved, remembered, and connected to others. But when the phone stops ringing, when the house grows quiet, when days pass without meaningful conversation, something inside a human being slowly begins to fade. And the frightening thing is this loneliness often arrives very quietly. At first, it feels peaceful. Then it feels empty. And eventually, it can feel unbearable. That is why the third habit that leads to happiness in old age is staying connected to people who truly matter. Not fake friendships, not relationships built only on convenience, but genuine human connection. At 85, I can tell you honestly that the happiest elderly people are rarely the ones with the most money. They are usually the ones surrounded by love, conversation, laughter, and meaningful relationships. Because human beings were never meant to live emotionally alone. I remember an old man named Samuel who lived near me years ago. After his wife passed away, he slowly stopped leaving his house. At first, neighbors still checked on him often. His children called regularly. Friends invited him places. But Samuel always said no. "I'm tired. Maybe another time. I don't feel like talking today." Weeks became months. Months became years. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming as often. One winter afternoon, I visited him unexpectedly. His house was silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. Dust rested heavily across the furniture. The television played softly in the background, not because he was watching it, but because he could no longer stand the silence. We sat together for nearly an hour before he finally whispered something I will never forget. "The hardest thing about getting old is feeling forgotten while you are still alive." Those words broke my heart. And the truth is, many elderly people secretly feel this way. As people age, the world moves faster around them. Children become busy. Friends pass away. Communities change. Technology changes. Suddenly, older people begin feeling left behind in a world that no longer slows down long enough to notice them. That is why connection becomes essential for happiness in old age. Not constant noise. Not endless social activity. Just meaningful connection. A conversation where someone truly listens. A hug that feels sincere. A visit that is not rushed. Someone remembering your favorite story even after hearing it many times. These things matter deeply. When I was younger, I underestimated how powerful relationships really were. I spent years prioritizing work, responsibilities, and ambition while assuming there would always be time later for family and friendships. But old age teaches you a painful lesson. Time together is never guaranteed. One day, your friends begin disappearing one by one. One chair at the dinner table becomes empty, then another, and suddenly, memories become more crowded than the room itself. That is why wise older people make a habit of nurturing relationships while they still can. Not perfectly, not constantly, but intentionally. I have a friend who is 92 years old. Every Sunday morning, he calls his daughter no matter what. The conversations are not always long. Sometimes they only talk for 10 minutes. But he never skips that call. One day I asked him why it mattered so much to him. He smiled and said, "Because relationships die slowly when they are not fed." What wisdom. Many people assume relationships survive automatically. But like gardens, relationships need care. They need attention, they need time. And the older you become, the more precious genuine relationships feel. At 85, I no longer care about impressing crowds. I care about the few people who truly know my heart. The people who stayed. The people who still ask how I'm doing and actually wait for the answer. The people who remember my stories. The people who laugh with me about memories from 40 years ago. Those connections become emotional lifelines in old age. One of the saddest mistakes elderly people make is withdrawing completely from others after experiencing loss or disappointment. Some stop trusting people after betrayal. Others isolate themselves after losing a spouse. Some feel embarrassed needing help as they age, so they slowly build emotional walls around themselves. But walls that keep pain out also keep love out, and no human heart can remain healthy without love entering it somehow. I learned this lesson after my wife became seriously ill many years ago. During that difficult season, I stopped talking to almost everyone. I felt emotionally exhausted. I did not want visitors. I did not want conversations. I thought isolating myself would protect me from more pain. Instead, it made everything heavier. One evening, an old friend showed up at my door unannounced, carrying nothing but coffee and sandwiches. He sat with me quietly for hours. We barely spoke about the illness itself, but somehow his presence reminded me that I was not carrying my pain alone, and sometimes that is all human beings truly need. Not solutions, not perfect advice, just someone willing to sit beside them in the darkness a while. As people grow older, companionship becomes one of life's greatest treasures. It is why elderly couples holding hands while walking slowly together can feel more beautiful than young romance. Their love survived decades. It endured hardship, disappointment, sickness, bills, mistakes, losses, and time itself. There is something sacred about that kind of connection. But connection does not only come through marriage. Friendship matters too. Family matters too. Community matters too. Even small daily interactions can protect the human spirit. A neighbor waving hello, a cashier smiling warmly, a grandchild calling unexpectedly, a friend checking in after weeks of silence. These moments remind older people that they still matter. And feeling needed is deeply connected to happiness. One of the greatest emotional fears in old age is becoming invisible. Many elderly people quietly wonder, "Does anyone still need me? Would anyone notice if I disappeared? Have I become a burden?" These thoughts can quietly break a person's spirit. That is why staying emotionally connected is not just pleasant. It is necessary. I know a woman in her late 80s who volunteers at a small library twice a week. Physically, she moves slowly now. Her hands tremble slightly when she shelves books, but every child who walks into that library runs toward her smiling. She once told me, with tears in her eyes, "Those children give me a reason to wake up." Purpose often grows through connection. When people feel emotionally connected, they continue feeling alive, they continue feeling useful, they continue feeling human. At 85, I have realized that happiness does not come from avoiding sadness altogether. Sadness is part of every long life. Loss is unavoidable, but love softens the weight of grief. Connection gives suffering somewhere to rest. I often think about family dinners from decades ago. The kitchen was noisy. Someone was always laughing too loudly. Children ran through the house. Plates clattered. Conversations overlapped. Back then, I sometimes wished for more quiet. Now I would give almost anything to hear those sounds again. Funny how life works. The things we once overlooked become the things we miss most deeply later. That is why happy older people learn not to take relationships for granted. They call people while they still can. They forgive more quickly. They spend time together intentionally. Because eventually, memories become all we have left of many people we love. And memories are warmer when they are built from connection instead of distance. So if you want happiness in old age, do not isolate your heart. Reach out to people. Answer the phone. Visit family. Invite someone for coffee. Tell people you love them while they are still here to hear it. Do not wait for funerals to express affection. At 85, I can promise you this. A connected heart ages more gently than a lonely one. The wrinkles still come. The gray hair still arrives. The body still weakens. But love keeps the soul alive. And in the end, most people will not remember how much money they made or how successful they appeared to the world. They will remember who sat beside them, who stayed, who cared, who loved them through every season of life. Because happiness in old age is rarely about having more things. It is about having more meaningful people to share your remaining days with. And one of the most dangerous lies people believe about aging is this, that life becomes meaningless once you grow old. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, the body changes. Yes, the world moves differently around you. Yes, opportunities look different than they once did. But purpose does not disappear with age unless a person stops searching for it. And I have learned something important after living this long. People who lose their sense of purpose often lose their happiness soon after. Because the human soul needs a reason to keep waking up in the morning. I remember the day I retired from work many years ago. Everyone congratulated me. There was cake in the office break room. People shook my hand and said things like, "Now you can finally relax." At first, retirement felt wonderful. I slept later. I watched television whenever I wanted. I sat in the backyard drinking coffee without worrying about schedules. But after a while, something strange began happening. The days started blending together. Monday felt like Thursday. Weeks passed without meaning. I no longer felt needed in the same way. And quietly, a deep emptiness started growing inside me. You see, many people spend their whole lives building routines around responsibility. Work gives them identity. Raising children gives them purpose. Caring for others gives structure to their days. Then suddenly, old age arrives and much of that structure disappears. Children move away. Careers end. The phone rings less often. People stop asking for your help as much. And if a person is not careful, they begin feeling useless. That feeling can quietly destroy the spirit. I have met elderly people who were physically healthy, but emotionally fading because they no longer believed they mattered. They sat in silence day after day, waiting for time to pass instead of truly living. But I have also met 90-year-olds who still wake up every morning with light in their eyes because they found new reasons to keep going. That is the difference purpose makes. Purpose does not always have to be grand. That is something younger people misunderstand. At 85, purpose is not necessarily about building businesses, becoming famous, or chasing huge dreams anymore. Sometimes purpose becomes smaller, softer, and more beautiful. Sometimes purpose means calling a lonely friend every evening. Sometimes it means baking cookies for grandchildren. Sometimes it means tending a garden carefully every morning. Sometimes it means praying for others quietly. Sometimes it means sharing wisdom with younger generations. Purpose simply means your life still touches other lives in meaningful ways, and that feeling creates happiness. I once knew an elderly man named Robert who lost his wife after 60 years of marriage. After her death, he fell into deep sadness. He barely left his home for nearly a year. Then one day, a local school invited him to speak to children about history because he had served in the military many decades earlier. At first, he almost refused, but eventually he agreed. When he returned home that afternoon, something about him had changed. His eyes looked brighter. His voice carried energy again. Later he told me, "For the first time in a long while, I felt useful again." That moment stayed with me because it revealed something powerful. Purpose gives people emotional oxygen. Without it, the heart slowly suffocates. Many elderly people become unhappy not because they are old, but because they stop feeling needed. And honestly, society often contributes to this problem. The world celebrates youth constantly. Older people are sometimes treated as though their usefulness expired years ago. But wisdom has enormous value. Experience has value. Kindness has value. Patience has value. Stories have value. An elderly person carries entire decades of lessons inside them. They survived heartbreaks, wars, financial struggles, losses, mistakes, and seasons younger generations cannot even imagine yet. That knowledge matters. I believe one of the greatest tragedies in modern life is how often elderly people feel discarded instead of honored. But happiness in old age grows when a person realizes something deeply important. Your worth is not measured by your productivity. You still matter even if you walk slower. You still matter even if you cannot work like before. You still matter even if the world no longer applauds you loudly. Your existence alone carries value. At 85, I no longer move quickly. Sometimes I need help opening jars. Sometimes stairs feel heavier than they once did. There are mornings my knees ache before my feet even touch the floor, but I still have purpose. Every week, my grandson visits me to hear old family stories. He asks questions about people who passed away long before he was born. He listens carefully while I speak. And during those moments, I realize something beautiful. My memories have become part of my purpose. The stories I carry are now gifts for future generations. Many older people think they have nothing left to offer simply because they are no longer young. But age itself can become a source of wisdom and guidance. Younger people often pretend they do not need advice, but deep down, they hunger for wisdom from someone who has truly lived. One conversation with an older person can change a young person's entire direction in life. Never underestimate that. I remember my grandfather sitting quietly on his porch when I was a child. He was not wealthy. He was not famous. But when he spoke, everyone listened because his words carried life experience. Back then, I did not fully appreciate his wisdom. Now at 85, I finally understand the gift he was giving us simply by sharing his perspective. Purpose often lives in the small ways we influence others. A kind word, a lesson, a memory, a prayer, a moment of encouragement. These things may seem tiny, but they ripple outward farther than we realize. There is also another truth many elderly people discover: purpose protects the mind from despair. People who continue learning, helping, creating, or contributing emotionally tend to age with more hope. Their minds remain active. Their hearts stay engaged with life. I know an 88-year-old woman who began painting at age 80. 80. Most people believe life is already ending at that age, but she started something entirely new. When asked why she began so late in life, she laughed softly and said, "Because I was still alive." What a beautiful answer. Still alive. That alone is reason enough to continue growing. One of the worst things a person can do in old age is mentally surrender before life is truly over. Some people begin waiting for death long before death actually arrives. They stop dreaming, stop connecting, stop trying new things, stop caring. And little by little, their spirit fades before their body does. But the happiest elderly people keep engaging with life somehow. They read books, they write letters, they care for pets, they volunteer, they pray, they garden, they teach, they encourage others. They create routines that give meaning to their days. Purpose does not need to impress the world. It only needs to nourish the soul. At 85, my happiest days are not the days when everything is perfect. They are the days when I feel emotionally useful to someone else. When someone calls asking for advice. When family gathers around my table. When I help a neighbor. When I comfort someone hurting. When I share a memory that makes others smile. Those moments remind me I am still part of life, not separate from it. And that feeling matters deeply in old age. I have also learned this purpose and gratitude often walk together. When people stop focusing only on what they lost and begin focusing on what they can still give, happiness quietly returns. Because giving creates meaning. Even now, late in life, there are still ways to bring light into this world. A gentle conversation with a lonely person. A handwritten note. A warm meal shared with family. A prayer whispered for someone suffering. These acts may seem small to the world, but to the human heart, they are enormous. So if you ever reach old age and begin wondering whether your life still matters, I hope you remember this. You do not need youthful strength to live meaningfully. You do not need perfect health to make a difference. You do not need the world's attention to have purpose. As long as your heart can still love, encourage, teach, comfort, or care for someone else, your life still carries beautiful purpose. And purpose, perhaps more than almost anything else, keeps happiness alive in old age. After living through nearly an entire century of joys, losses, surprises, heartbreaks, and quiet miracles, I have come to understand something very few people realize when they are young. Happiness in old age is not something that accidentally appears. It is something gently built through daily habits of the heart, not perfect habits, not dramatic habits, but quiet emotional choices repeated over many years. And perhaps the most important of all these choices is learning how to protect your inner peace. Because by the time a person reaches 80 or 90, they finally understand how precious peace truly is. When I was younger, I wasted so much energy on things that no longer matter to me now. I worried endlessly about what people thought of me. I argued over small disagreements. I stressed about money constantly, even during moments that should have been joyful. I thought tension was simply part of being responsible. But age changes your perspective. At 85, I no longer believe every argument deserves my attention. Not every criticism deserves my response. Not every problem deserves my panic. Some things simply do not deserve the limited emotional energy we have left. That is why the fifth habit that leads to happiness in old age is learning to protect your peace carefully. The older you become, the more you realize how emotionally exhausting conflict truly is. I once had a neighbor who spent years arguing with everyone around him. He fought with family members, complained constantly about politics, held grudges against old friends, and found fault in nearly everything. And although he was financially comfortable, he was deeply unhappy. You could see it in his face. His anger became his personality. Meanwhile, another elderly man living down the street had far fewer possessions, but carried a calmness that made people feel peaceful just sitting near him. He smiled easily. He avoided unnecessary drama. He accepted imperfections gracefully. One day I asked him how he stayed so calm. He laughed softly and said, "At my age, peace is worth more than being right." I never forgot those words. Peace is worth more than being right. That sentence alone contains years of wisdom. As people age, they slowly begin realizing that happiness depends less on controlling life and more on responding to life gently. You cannot control aging. You cannot control loss. You cannot control time, but you can protect the condition of your heart. And peaceful hearts suffer differently than restless ones. I have noticed something over the years. People who remain emotionally peaceful in old age tend to enjoy life more deeply. They notice beauty more easily. They laugh more freely. They sleep better. They love more openly. Not because their lives are easier, but because they stopped carrying unnecessary emotional noise everywhere they go. At 85, silence no longer frightens me the way it once did. In fact, I treasure quiet moments now. Early mornings before the world wakes up. Rain falling gently outside the window. Soft music playing while the house rests peacefully. These moments heal something deep inside the soul. And perhaps that is one of aging's hidden gifts. Eventually, you stop chasing chaos and begin craving peace instead. But peace alone is not enough. The sixth habit that leads to happiness in old age is gratitude. Now listen carefully, because this habit can completely transform the final chapter of a person's life. Gratitude does not mean pretending life is perfect. It means recognizing that even imperfect life still contains beauty. At 85, I have buried friends I loved deeply. I have stood beside hospital beds. I have watched seasons of my life disappear forever. And yet, gratitude still finds ways to survive inside me. Why? Because every morning I wake up, life is still giving me something. Another sunrise. Another conversation. Another memory. Another chance to love people while I still can. Many unhappy elderly people spend all their time focusing on what age took away from them. My body isn't the same. My friends are gone. The world has changed. I miss the past. And yes, those feelings are real. But gratitude asks a different question. What still remains? That question changes everything. I still have memories. I still have love. I still have stories. I still have breath in my lungs. I still have moments capable of bringing joy. And so do many people who believe their happiness has disappeared forever. One evening, I sat outside watching the sunset with an elderly woman who had lost almost everything financially after her husband passed away. Yet somehow, she remained full of warmth. As the sky turned orange and gold, she smiled and whispered, "Isn't it amazing we still get to see this?" That moment humbled me deeply. Some people see only what life removed. Others still notice what life continues giving. Gratitude keeps the heart soft, and soft hearts age more beautifully than bitter ones. I truly believe gratitude protects people from emotional starvation in old age. It feeds the soul even during difficult seasons. A thankful person can still find joy in very small things. Fresh coffee, a phone call, warm socks in winter, birdsong outside the window, a child's laughter, a peaceful night of sleep. These things become treasures later in life. Young people often overlook ordinary moments because they assume there will always be more of them. Old people know better. At 85, I understand that every ordinary day is actually extraordinary. Because nothing is guaranteed anymore. That awareness makes life feel more precious. And finally, there is the seventh habit. Perhaps the hardest and most beautiful habit of all, learning to accept life with grace. This may be the greatest secret to happiness in old age. Acceptance. Not defeat, not hopelessness, not giving up. Acceptance simply means making peace with reality instead of fighting it constantly. Many people become miserable because they spend their final years arguing with life itself. They fight aging, fight change, fight time, fight loss. But eventually, every human being must face the truth that life was never meant to stay the same forever. Youth fades, children grow up, bodies weaken, people leave, seasons change. That is the nature of life itself. And strangely enough, happiness often arrives when resistance finally softens. I remember staring at myself in the mirror years ago after noticing how much older I suddenly looked. My hair had thinned. My face carried deep lines. My posture had changed. For a moment, sadness hit me hard. I missed the younger man I used to be. But then another thought came quietly into my heart. These wrinkles were earned. Every line carried a story. Every gray hair survived something. Every scar proved I lived. And suddenly, aging no longer felt ugly to me. It felt human. There is dignity in growing old gracefully, not pretending to be young forever, not hating yourself for changing, but honoring the life your body has carried through decades. The happiest elderly people I know are not the ones desperately trying to escape aging. They are the ones who learned how to walk beside it peacefully. They still care for themselves. They still smile. They still enjoy life. But they no longer hate themselves for growing older. That acceptance creates emotional freedom. At 85, I no longer need life to be perfect to enjoy it. That may sound simple, but it changes everything. I can enjoy rainy days now, quiet days, slow days, even lonely days sometimes, because happiness is no longer dependent on perfection. It is built from appreciation, peace, purpose, connection, gratitude, forgiveness, and acceptance. These 7 habits slowly shape a joyful old age, and perhaps this is the biggest lesson life has taught me after all these years. Happiness is not something we find at the end of life. It is something we practice along the way, one quiet moment at a time, one grateful thought at a time, one loving connection at a time. So if you are growing older and wondering whether happiness is still possible for you, let this old heart tell you something honestly. Yes, it is. Not because life becomes easier, but because wisdom teaches you what truly matters. And once you finally understand what truly matters, even ordinary days begin to feel like blessings. I'm 85 years old now, and if life has taught me anything, it is this: growing old is not the tragedy people think it is. Yes, aging can be painful. Yes, there are lonely nights. Yes, there are losses so deep they change your heart forever. But there is also something quietly beautiful about reaching this stage of life. Because after decades of rushing, worrying, chasing, proving, struggling, and surviving, you finally begin to see life clearly. And clarity is a gift many people never fully receive. When I was young, I believed happiness was something big and dramatic. I thought happy people were the ones with perfect families, successful careers, beautiful homes, and exciting lives. But now, at 85, I understand that real happiness was never hidden inside those things. Real happiness was always much softer than that. It was sitting beside someone you love in complete silence and still feeling understood. It was hearing laughter echo through the kitchen. It was watching the sunset after a difficult day and realizing you survived. It was forgiveness. It was peace. It was gratitude. It was connection. It was purpose. It was learning how to accept life instead of fighting every season of it. The world spends so much time teaching people how to stay young that it forgets to teach them how to grow old gracefully. But old age carries wisdom that youth cannot understand yet. At 85, I no longer need to impress anyone. I no longer compare my life to others. I no longer chase things that leave the soul empty. And honestly, that freedom feels wonderful. One of the greatest surprises of aging is discovering how little a person truly needs in order to feel happiness. A peaceful morning, a meaningful conversation, a warm blanket on a cold night, a visit from family, a memory shared over coffee, someone saying, "I'm glad you're here." These things become priceless later in life, and perhaps they were always priceless. We were simply too busy to notice. I sometimes sit quietly and think about all the people I have loved over the years. Some are still here. Many are gone now. Their voices live only in memory. Their laughter belongs to the past. And yet somehow love remains. That may be one of life's greatest mysteries. People leave this world, but the love they gave us stays alive inside our hearts. Even now, I can still hear my mother's voice in certain moments. I can still remember my father's tired hands. I can still picture friends laughing around old dinner tables long after midnight. Time took many things from me, but it could not take those memories. And strangely enough, Old age teaches you to treasure memories differently. You stop measuring life only by accomplishments and begin measuring it by moments. Moments of kindness, moments of courage, moments of love, moments of togetherness. Because in the end, those are the things that truly remain. I know many people fear aging because they fear becoming weak, forgotten, or alone. And yes, those fears are real. Some days in old age are undeniably difficult. But there is another side to aging people rarely talk about. There is beauty in becoming softer, beauty in becoming wiser, beauty in learning patience, beauty in finally understanding what matters and what never did. At 85, I have learned that happiness does not belong only to the young. In some ways, older people are actually closer to understanding happiness fully because they have already seen how temporary everything else is. Money fades, beauty changes, status disappears, fame is forgotten. But love, peace, gratitude, those things remain valuable until the very end. I wish younger people understood how quickly life moves. One moment you are 20 years old thinking old age is far away. Then suddenly you are watching your grandchildren grow while wondering where the decades went. Life passes quietly, almost secretly. That is why happiness cannot be postponed forever. Do not wait until everything is perfect before allowing yourself to feel joy. There will always be problems, always unfinished plans, always worries. But happiness grows in small moments happening right now. The smell of coffee in the morning, rain against the roof, holding someone's hand, listening to music from long ago, watching the sky change colors before evening arrives. These ordinary moments become sacred later in life, and perhaps the biggest lesson of all is this: no one escapes pain. Every person loses something eventually. Every person experiences heartbreak. Every person carries invisible scars. But the people who remain happiest in old age are usually not the people who avoided suffering. They are the people who continued loving despite suffering. They kept their hearts open. They kept showing kindness. They kept choosing gratitude. They kept finding beauty even after disappointment. That is courage. Real courage is not pretending life is easy. Real courage is continuing to see beauty after life breaks your heart a few times. At 85, I wake up slower than I once did. My hands tremble slightly sometimes. Stairs feel taller than they used to. There are mornings when my body reminds me very clearly that I am no longer young. But there are also mornings when sunlight enters my room so gently that I feel overwhelming gratitude simply for being alive one more day. And honestly, that feeling is enough. Because happiness in old age is not about having everything. It is about finally understanding what truly matters. So if you are listening to this today, whether you are young, middle-aged, or already growing old yourself, I hope you remember these 7 habits. Appreciate small moments. Let go of bitterness. Stay connected to people who matter. Keep purpose alive. Protect your peace. Choose gratitude. Accept life with grace. These habits will not remove every hardship from your life, but they will help your soul remain warm even during difficult seasons. And in the final chapters of life, a warm soul matters more than almost anything else. I'm 85 years old now, and after everything life has given me and taken from me, I can still say this honestly: there is still beauty here. There is still joy here. There is still reason to smile here, even now, especially now,